Hi, everybody. My name is Zen Honeycutt of Moms Across America, and I'm here with Dr. Stephanie Seneff. Hi, Stephanie.
Hi, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you. We're so glad to have you on here today to bring some awareness to your new paper that is out. But first, let's establish who you are for our viewers.
hmm
Who are you? And give us a little bit of your background.
Okay, I'm Stephanie Seneff. I'm a senior research scientist at MIT, where I've been all my research life has been at MIT, including my education. So I have background degrees, multiple degrees from MIT in biology and in computer science and electrical engineering. And the last 10 years, I've been researching autism and zeroed in on glyphosate, which is the active ingredient in the pervasive herbicide Roundup, about maybe 5 years ago. And I've just basically really focused on studying glyphosate since then because it's a very fascinating molecule. And I am increasingly convinced that it is a core reason why the U.S. has a healthcare crisis today. So I think it causes much, much more than autism, and we need to get rid of it. We need to ban it from the earth. That's my conclusion. So
Excellent. Well, we agree. And I'm not a scientist like you are, but from talking to all the mothers that we speak to about switching over from GMO foods, which are sprayed with glyphosate, or non-organic foods, and then we see their children get better when they avoid those foods and glyphosate. We have come to the conclusion as well that it is extremely harmful and that we want it banned from the planet as well. So thank you very much for making that statement, because it does take some courage. I mean, this is a $40 billion a year business for many of the chemical companies, and it's a behemoth sort of thing, right? It's a big.
I know. It's amazing, actually, how much control they have over the government and how willing the government is to go ahead and poison the population because of the money issue is just absolutely amazing to me.
Yeah. So before we get into the science, I do want to ask, what makes you uniquely sort of qualified to do all this research on glyphosate? Can you talk a little bit about how you have at your facility the ability to scan thousands of documents and
Right.
all of that?
Yeah,
Can you talk a little bit about that?
sure. I think my computer science background is really very powerful in conjunction with my biology background, because many of the computer scientists don't really understand the biology and they just kind of throw numbers at it. They get stuff, they don't understand it. Whereas I have an interest in biology as well. So I'm combining the two, and then I can go and use the computer science to study the research literature with the computer to help me to sort things out and organize and find common threads, and then figure out puzzles. And I love figuring out puzzles, and the computer helps me do that. So it's really a lot of fun. I love my research, and we're getting all these correlations too. We go and get a lot of statistical analyses and see very strong correlations, and we can compute the p-value, the significance values with 0.00001 significance for correlations between things like autism and glyphosate. So that provides a very powerful backdrop for the idea that glyphosate might be causing autism. Of course, correlation is never proven to be causal until you can understand the underlying biology. So that's where I've been focusing, and that's so fascinating to understand how glyphosate works in the body to cause harm. And it's an amazing molecule.
So
And we're very fascinated.
how many documents would you say that you have had access to through your computer science to be able to scan and to pull information from?
Well, I don't know. I have, probably tens of thousands of documents on my computer, and I put various packages together with various topics and then number crunch those to come up with words and correlations, and then try to use that to help me solve the puzzle. So I'm finding pathways, and different metabolic pathways that are disrupted, and the whole field of biology is full of incredibly complicated information. Biology is so amazing with its complexity and all the signaling, that goes on, and all this causes that, and it's just very, very difficult to sort through all of that. But I feel that we're really, the team that I'm working with, we're really cracking open this nut and figuring out particularly autism, but also many other of the diseases that we're seeing. For example, anencephaly, which is what we'll be talking about today. When you take a particular disease and then you take a bunch of data and a bunch of articles and you number crunch it, and then you can help to sort everything out and figure out the larger story, which is the part that I find really fascinating. The story that ties all of that information together and makes sense out of it.
Great. So let's get into that. And with the understanding that you haven't done a study with 2,000 rats that took 5 years to come up with this conclusion or theory that you have, that you present in your paper, right? This isn't.
No, it's a review. In a sense, it's a review paper.
Yeah.
In fact, one of the frustrations is that there isn't really a category for the kind of paper that I write, which is the kind of paper I think is really one of the most powerful kinds of papers one should be writing, where you gather the evidence from the existing research literature and then build this larger story that explains the pathology that you're observing and try to connect to do things like proving that a chemical is causing a disease, through the evidence that's already in the research literature.
The way that I look at it is that you're doing like a Google search of thousands of documents, and you're pulling this information. The most pertinent is coming to the top, and
yes.
you're presenting it to the public like, look, this is what could be happening.
Yes.
And then you get criticized, and,
right.
and frankly, we get criticized for showing your science because they're like, well, it hasn't been proven. Well, but if you look at the thousands of documents and the millions of words of information out there and you pull this together,
yes.
I think as a mother, I have a right to know that this is what's coming to the top, right? That this
right.
is what you suspect to be a major contributing factor to anencephaly. So
yes.
let's talk about that. Let's say, what is anencephaly?
Yes.
And why should we be concerned about this? What is anencephaly?
So anencephaly literally means no brain, and it's a very severe disorder in a child. The child's not viable. They usually die shortly after birth. The child is born without a cerebral cortex, so there's basically no brain. The neural tube, when it was developing in the very early stages of the pregnancy, the neural tube has to close, and when neural tube closure doesn't work correctly, then things really get messed up in the continuation of that development of the brain, and the entire cortex just basically gets aborted. It just doesn't happen.
Well, and this is devastating, and it's been happening at higher levels. I happen to meet a woman who works at a high-risk OBGYN office, and she said she's seeing more and more birth defects, anencephaly, and also where the organs are outside of the body.
Gastroschisis.
Yeah,
it's another form of neural tube developmental problems, and that's also probably caused by glyphosate. Gastroschitis, it's the same thing. I mean, a different part of the neural tube, but the same problem, which it would make sense that it would cause that too, given what we found. It's all kind of the same, has a lot of commonalities.
Okay, so let's talk about how could glyphosate cause this? What do you see from your science? What's happening?
Well, that's where it's a very, very long list, and it would take too long for me to tell you everything, but I do have the paper, and so with a paper that I wrote together with Dr. Greg Nye, and you're going to show it to them here in a moment. This has just come out on the web. It's published in this journal of neurology and neurobiology. Open access journal. So if you want to learn all the gory details, download that paper and read it. It's really, I think, remarkable what we found. We suspected anencephaly because we were seeing it particularly in Yakima Valley. That's what really caught my eye, and that's what caused me to get interested in this topic, because Yakima Valley in Washington State, it's a big river system. There's a Yakima River that kind of goes through this valley and supplies water for the irrigation system for the crops that grow along the edges of that valley. And they were having troubles with an invasive weed. And they had the deliberation, and they decided that the best thing to do was to use glyphosate in the water to control this weed. And they did this over a period of a few years. I think it was like 2010 to 2015. And particularly high levels of glyphosate were used in 2012 and 2013, which was when they had the peak. Over that whole period, they had way too many cases of anencephaly in that area compared to the average. It was like, 5 times as high as the normal rate. Normal, of course, is the bad word, because there shouldn't be any anencephaly, in my opinion. Anyway, they, of course, didn't have any clue that it could be glyphosate, because they never, ever think of glyphosate, and this is what frustrates me. And so they, but anyway, when you look at the data, it's very compelling that the glyphosate usage corresponds to the anencephaly, and therefore this gives you, again, it's a correlation idea, and it gives you a hint that glyphosate might cause it, which is all I need to then go after the research literature to try to see if it is plausible, to look for plausible reasons why it could. And I hit gold. I mean, it was just incredible. And we call this death by 1,000 cuts for a good reason, because there were just so many different ways in which glyphosate would disturb neural development, particularly the closure of the neural tube.
So let's look at that. Here's the article. Should we go over the abstract first, sort of the summary of what you found?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So tell us about this summary. So you say that here that we review a multitude of ways in which glyphosate can detrimentally impact or cut embryological and fetal development to specifically favor the anencephalic phenotype. Can you explain how does it cut?
Well, we use the term cut because we like the title "Death by a Thousand Cuts," but basically, it's destructive of many different pathways. A lot of it has to do with various problems with different nutrients that are crucial for the development. One of which, of course, is retinoic acid. Retinoic acid is famous. That's vitamin A. It's famous as a cause of neural tube defects when there's too much excessive retinoic acid. And this is something that's quite straightforward with regard to glyphosate, because glyphosate disrupts cytochrome P450 enzymes. And you've talked about this before in the liver, which are important for detoxifying things. You know, many other toxic chemicals get detoxified through these CYP enzymes. But one of the things they do is to metabolize retinoic acid. And they're actually produced in the neural tube during development. And there's a crucial timing situation that goes on. It's quite interesting because the neural tube produces retinoic acid, and then it depends on the concentration to control what goes on in the timing of the development. And then the retinoic acid needs to fade away and needs to be actively removed in certain parts in order to trigger a next stage in the development. And if it isn't adequately removed, then that stage won't happen. So that's a way that you can get an abortion of the step that's going on to close the neural tube at the cranial region, so that you're going to produce then this, go forward to this next step of building the brain. So excessive retinoic acid.
Let me try to wrap my head around this. So you're saying that, so the body develops in stages, which makes sense, right? Energy needs to flow to like the heart and then the lungs or whichever. I'm just making this up now, but stages, right? Mm-hmm. And so there's a certain stage in which the neurotube is being developed and it needs to close so that then the brain can develop. Yes, that's right. And that can get all messed up if there's too much retinoic acid. It doesn't get adequately removed. And how does glyphosate impact the retinoic acid, though? Because it produces, so the CYP enzyme is produced, but if the glyphosate's there, it's going to disrupt the CYP enzyme's ability to do its job, which is to remove the retinoic acid. Now, there's another one, vitamin D, which is the same thing again, only it's different. Vitamin D actually gets activated by CYP enzymes. So these enzymes are really, really important, and they're getting disrupted by glyphosate. Vitamin D doesn't get activated, again, because of CYP enzyme disruption, and that ends up being a deficiency in vitamin D, which we have an epidemic in that, but that's also linked to anencephaly. Women who have low vitamin D are more likely to produce an anencephaly, a child with anencephaly. That vitamin D is also critical for development. Wow. Okay. So the glyphosate disrupts the CYP enzyme. Yes. And that ability to stop the making of the retinoic acid. And then the retinoic acid keeps being made, and then the neurotube does not close. It stays open. Yes. And so then the brain doesn't form because the energy doesn't. Yes, it doesn't go on to that next stage of development. It just skips. Yeah. That is fascinating. Okay, so so glyphosate is sort of cutting off that ability for the next process is what you're talking about. And there's just so many things that go into the timing to make that work properly. It's amazing actually that it works as well as it does most of the time. And you can scroll down here and get to that table where I have the various nutrients. I talked already about retinoic acid. There's a couple tables in here that kind of focus the discussion right here. And you can see this list on the left of the nutrient and then the mechanism on the right. Zinc, cobalamin, folate, retinoic acid, which we've talked about, methionine, and vitamin D we've talked about as well. So we've already covered two of these. Methionine is a really big one because you probably know about methionine deficiency and methylation impairment, which is linked to autism, impaired methylation capacity. You probably may have heard about all of that. And so methionine is the core amino acid, sulfur-containing amino acid. And I've talked a lot about sulfur because glyphosate is an absolute train wreck for sulfur, starting with an inability to convert inorganic sulfur into methionine, which is an organic form of sulfur, in the gut by the gut microbes. So this is an effect on the gut microbes, E. coli in particular. A study showed that E. coli had several enzymes that were involved in methionine synthesis that were suppressed by glyphosate exposure. So this means your gut microbes can't make methionine. It also probably, in fact, they've shown methionine deficiency in plants exposed to glyphosate. So you're going to have methionine deficiency in your diet, and then you're going to have impaired ability to make it in your gut, which is going to lead to an impaired methylation capacity, and methylation is a crucial aspect of development. So that can also cause trouble with the neural tube development. So and by impaired methylation and impaired development, so impaired development in a fetus, yes. how does that impact, I know we're talking mostly about fetuses now, but how would that impact a human being that's, you know, already alive to have impaired methylation?
Oh, well, it causes a lot of problems there too. And I think it's tightly connected to autism. A lot of people have talked about genetic disorders that are linked to autism that involve this methylation pathway. So methionine has this methyl group on it. That's why it has the name methionine with a meth there. And that methyl group, folate, is involved in that too. And you can see folate's on this list as well. Folate is really a big one that people are very aware of. There's been a lot of emphasis on folate during pregnancy, folate supplements during early pregnancy to try to protect from neural tube defects. And glyphosate disrupts folate because that's a direct product of the shikimate pathway. And glyphosate kills the shikimate pathway. I'm sure you know that. That's the...
Yes.
And so in the gut microbes actually make folate for the host. And I actually found several articles that talked about that, quite remarkable, very clearly, that they make the folate for the host. So when that process gets busted because the shikimate pathway is disrupted, they can't do that anymore. The folate becomes deficient. So folate is an enabler of the methylation pathway. So both the folate and the methionine together are going to disrupt the ability to produce these methyl groups and to attach these methyl groups to the DNA, which is a step towards controlling how the development takes place. So it's going to mess up the development in multiple ways, one of which is going to be the anencephaly. But various all kinds of neural tube defects are connected to folate, like spina bifida, for example. I mean, they actually put folic acid into the wheat. They made a law to do that in 1998, to add folic acid to wheat, because they were aware of this problem of neural tube defects probably increasing right before that. And of course, they've interestingly, and we talked about that, I think, in this paper, they monitored the folate levels in pregnant women in a period of time after they introduced this folate into the food supply, over like from 2000.
Did you say 1998? They made
1998. They started adding folic acid to the wheat, and then they monitored the women from 2000 to 2005, and they found that their folate levels actually went down. So despite getting more folic acid in their wheat, it wasn't working. Basically, folate levels were dropping in the population. I think that's because on top of that was this rapid growth in the GMO Roundup ready crops, which was offsetting any gains they were getting from the folic acid in the wheat.
Yeah, well, because we know now glyphosate sprayed on wheat as a drying agent.
Yes.
That's a chelator. It draws out the vital nutrients or makes them unavailable to any living thing it touches. So it's going to impact all of these things that, like you're saying, that the zinc and the folate, just from that chelation effect by itself, right?
Yes, the chelation is what's going to disrupt the zinc, but more than that, and I didn't realize this until I wrote this paper, I know glyphosate binds tightly to zinc, and so it disrupts all the metals. And I know all these minerals that are so important, zinc and iron and cobalt, manganese, they're all disrupted by glyphosate. But zinc in particular was quite interesting because papers showed that in the presence of glyphosate, the liver produces a huge amounts of a protein called metallothionein. And metallothionein loves zinc. It takes in tons of zinc. It binds to zinc like a magnet. And it actually prevents the zinc from getting into the general circulation. So the liver hogs the zinc inside these metallothionein molecules that it's massively producing in the presence of glyphosate. And this causes a zinc deficiency. So when the mother's exposed to glyphosate, she makes lots of this metallothionein. The zinc gets trapped in it. And then the zinc is deficient in the rest of her body, including in the developing fetus. And then zinc deficiency is also a very strong factor in neurotube developmental problems. So that's just another nutrient that gets messed up, but both through the chelation by glyphosate, but also through the absorption by this metallothionein.
Right, and when a male is exposed to glyphosate and the glyphosate goes after the zinc, then his sperm levels are going to be diminished.
That's right.
That's sperm, and we're seeing that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, the epidemic in male infertility is very scary, and I think glyphosate's a direct hit there. I'd like to write a whole paper on that at some point.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then we have one more here, which is cobalamin. That's also a super, super important nutrient that's also linked to neurotube deficiencies. That's B12, vitamin B12. And this one actually has multiple ways in which glyphosate disrupts it. It messes up its synthesis because there's a critical first early stage in its synthesis, this ALA pathway. ALA step is disrupted, and it also chelates cobalt, making that unavailable. That was shown in cows, severely suppressed levels of cobalt in cows exposed to glyphosate. So that's going to be a double hit on cobalamin. Cobalamin and folate are both really important for this methylation capacity. So all of that is disrupted by glyphosate. Now we can go down to the other table.
Okay. 1 second. So here's where you talk about each one of these issues and why it's impactful, which you just summarized for us. So now tell us a little bit about this chart.
Yeah, now this one is really amazing and much too much detail here to go into. You can see the metallothionein most of the way down. We mentioned that. Not only is that protein hogging zinc, it also has a lot of glycines in it. You look at this MS, if you can read that MSCCGGNCGCS motif, is a particular sequence of amino acids in that protein, and those G's in there are glycines. And what we have discovered is that if we assume that glyphosate is substituting for glycine by mistake during protein synthesis, it can explain a lot of the correlations that we're seeing. We're seeing all these correlations with all these diseases, and you say, how can one molecule have caused so many diseases? It doesn't make sense. If you assume it's doing this, it's getting into those proteins by mistake, you can explain all of those diseases. That's what's really, truly remarkable. And in the case of anencephaly, there's a huge list here of crucial proteins that have essential glycines. So you see here this conserved G category. Protein on the left here, all these different proteins, insulin receptor, all these receptors, insulin receptor, folate receptor, LDL receptor, all three are disrupted. They have essential glycines in them. If those glycines are replaced by anything else, really, or lots of other amino acids could go in instead of glycine, and if you do that, they won't work. The protein gets busted. That has to be glycine. This is what's so interesting, is that these proteins have certain glycines that are absolutely essential for their function. And that's where you can find all these papers that talk about these things. They never mention glyphosate because they're not thinking in terms of glyphosate substituting. But if you do think in terms of that, you can explain why all these proteins are impaired, and then you can explain why glyphosate would cause this disease. And that's what we've done here. All these different proteins that play a crucial role in development have essential glycines, and that would be catastrophic if those glycines got replaced by glyphosate.
Yeah, so I want to address that there are scientists that say that glyphosate cannot substitute for glycine and go into the cells. That's what you're talking about, right?
Yes. I'm getting a huge amount of pushback, actually. Most scientists are saying that.
What do you have to say to them about that?
I think that they're wrong, and I think that the studies have not been done. No one has proven that it's not happening. Right. And so they're equally, weak as I am. But both sides are weak because neither side has proven that the other side is wrong. I have a tremendous amount of evidence, including the shikimate pathway, which is quite remarkable. The enzyme that it disrupts in the shikimate pathway is called EPSP synthase. That enzyme has an essential glycine at the site where PEP, phosphoenolpyruvate, fits into a pocket. And they've studied the enzyme to try to figure out how does glyphosate disrupt it. And they've determined that glyphosate gets in the way of PEP in that pocket. But they haven't yet, they're puzzled over exactly how it does that. Well, one way it can do it is by replacing the glycine. And the glycine is absolutely conserved. Typically, it's highly conserved amino acid at that spot and crucial for things, for the PEP to be able to fit. So multiple species of animals, of microbes, multiple species of microbes and multiple species of plants have independently discovered that if they replace that glycine in that protein with alanine, they take a hit. The protein doesn't work as well. It reduces its enzymatic activity, but they become completely immune to glyphosate. Getting rid of that glycine is what the protein needs to do to protect itself from glyphosate. That is almost the strongest evidence you can think of to say the most logical explanation for how glyphosate is affecting this protein is by displacing that glycine. It would totally explain what it's doing, what they're observing that it's doing. So I think that's the most compelling evidence.
Yeah, that sounds very compelling to me. And as a mother who wants to protect her children, I feel like even if it's not proven with 2,000 rats, taking 5 years to do this, I believe I have the right to this information. This is how it could be harming, especially if I'm going to be getting pregnant or if I have, friends that want to get pregnant. They should know this information before they try to get pregnant. And anybody who poo-poos it and says, no, this is not true and you should not be sharing it, could actually be contributing to birth defects happening. And that is very dangerous to just say this can't be happening. That's like when I when my son had an allergy and he said, I want all my allergies to go away. And in my head, I said, that's never going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Well, saying it's never going to happen doesn't help him.
No, I know. And in fact,
when I asked myself, maybe I could have his allergies go, what's possible? What could be happening? If he could make his allergies go away, what could we do about it? And that's when we had a breakthrough. And that's when we help to heal him. But if you don't look at what's possible, and if this
exactly. Well,
right?
People say you can't reverse autism, and that is not true. I know people who have reversed hundreds of cases of autism. Yeah. It's really remarkable. And a lot of it is just go organic, get some probiotics, go organic, get out in the sun. I mean, it's easy stuff. Yeah. And the thing is that I don't see any reason why one should not be allowed to do what I'm doing, which is to say, here are all these proteins, here are all these glycines, here is what would happen if, here's this evidence in the correlations, perfect correlation between glyphosate and this disease. This is how this could explain this disease on the basis of glyphosate substituting for glycine. To say it works here, it works there, it works everywhere. There's no reason why you can't say that hypothetically this is what would happen if glyphosate did this. Even though it hasn't been proven, it has not been proven that it doesn't do it either.
Well,
so there's no reason why you should be.
It's part of the scientific process to first come up with a hypothesis and put these things together and say, wait a second, this could be happening.
Right. I mean, you say if it does happen, it explains everything. That doesn't make you say it can't happen, therefore forget it. That should say, hey, maybe it is happening. Let's take a look. Right.
Yeah. So we're taking a look. What else is there anything else you want to explain about this chart?
I mean, there's so much here. It's kind of hard to go into the details. You can just see that the important thing really is just that this is available. And if you really wanted to learn, you could go and read these things, all these different disruptions that occur, cell cycle delay, fetal DHA sulfate deficiency is very interesting, actually. This one with the LDL receptor, very, very interesting, because that also connects to high serum LDL. The LDL receptor has a glycine, essential glycine residue. And if that's messed up, it won't go to the membrane, won't take up the LDL. This means you'll have high serum LDL, you'll be put on a statin drug. So this is what I think is a major...
Explain LDL again, that's related to cholesterol, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the so-called bad cholesterol. And so many people are getting tested and they're like, oh my God, I have high LDL, I have to take a statin drug. That's because the LDL is a particle that carries cholesterol and also carries fats, and it delivers them to the cells through this receptor. But if the receptor is broken, then the LDL sticks around in the blood and gets high, gets elevated. And then you're put on a statin drug to knock out the liver so that it can't produce it, which is the wrong solution. What you should do is get rid of the glyphosate so that the receptor can work again. But this receptor is also very important in development.
So glyphosate can disrupt the receptor that makes the LDL? That
takes it up into the cell, into the cell from the particle that's out in the blood. So when it can't take it up, then it just sticks around in the blood and builds up and gets high. You get elevated LDL. And the LDL receptor is very important during fetal development. And this is even not just anencephaly. This is going to be microcephaly as well, because even though the neural tube closed correctly, it's very, very interesting that the way the hormones work in the last trimester of pregnancy. This is so fascinating. We learned this from working on this paper. The fetal adrenal glands have this area called the fetal zone, and the fetal zone takes up cholesterol through the LDL receptor and converts it into this protein, this steroid called DHEA, and it puts sulfate attached to it as well. It makes DHEA sulfate and releases that into the serum, and then the placenta takes up the DHEA sulfate and converts it into estrone sulfate, which then goes back to the baby's brain and helps it to develop. So it's a coordination between the placenta and the baby. As the baby develops its fetal zone, then that's used to make this DHEA sulfate, which is then converted into estrone sulfate and goes and helps to build the baby's brain. If that process is broken down, then you're going to get microcephaly, even if you had proper closure.
I have to say, this is fascinating. You are a computer looking at life, at biology.
That's true.
You're looking how it all goes, it all syncs together. You're figuring out how life works.
It's very nerdy. It's very nerdy, but it's so fun.
This is fascinating. I could listen to this for hours. I love to figure out how things happen. Like, why is this happening to my child, right? What happened here? What happened there? And so the light bulb goes off when you said things like, when you and Samsel revealed the whole thing about shikimate pathway, how, glyphosate destroys the shikimate pathway in the bacteria in the gut.
Yes.
And we're like, wait a second, the gut is where 70% of the immune system lies. The gut
Absolutely.
is where the hormones are stored and made. And, like serotonin
Absolutely.
regulates diabetes. And all of a sudden now you're destroying the gut bacteria. You can't regulate, not diabetes, it regulates insulin, right? So, all of these connections start to come together and it's like, oh, this is what's happening.
Yes, and it's great that today there's so much interest in the gut microbiome, and it took them a long time to realize how important it is. And one of the reasons why they're noticing it now is because it's being ruined by glyphosate. The gut microbiome is really hurting as a consequence of glyphosate, and that is causing a huge, huge number of diseases that we're seeing in our population today. And I think it's just a big crisis that we're facing right now. I find more and more people are coming up with more and more strange diseases that they don't understand, the doctor can't treat. They're all being poisoned by glyphosate.
Here's diabetes. Yeah. So what you're saying here is it's not just impacting the gut, though. It's impacting the development of fetuses.
Yes.
It's causing these cuts that interrupt the development of the fetus in many different ways. That's why you said 1,000 different cuts.
That's right. You can see all these different topics here. And each one of these is going into the different proteins that can be disrupted if glyphosate is substituting for glycine. It's really quite amazing and so fascinating. The science is really wonderful. I think if someone is willing to take the time to really get into it, you can have a lot of fun. If you just have the kind of brain that likes to understand all of this and just get into the puzzle aspect of it, it's just really fascinating and extremely scary because the glyphosate is going to really take us down. I think it's terrifying, the future that we face right now.
It is terrifying, and I'm grateful to you and is it your partner Gregory Nye that worked?
Yes, yes.
Please thank Gregory because this is absolutely, I have to say that this is crucial to the future of mankind. I have to say human beings, right?
I agree. I feel that way. I feel we're in a threshold of, we're at a crossroads where if we don't go a different direction, we're not going to survive. I mean, when you look at the infertility itself, it can totally cause us to become extinct. Really, if we can't reproduce, that's the end of the line for humans. And we're headed in that direction.
Yeah, we are headed in that direction. And the sad thing is what will happen first is that the people who can't procreate, which will be a lot of people. I mean, in areas in China, it could be 6 years from now from the studies that they've already found testing 30,000.
Yes, I know. I saw that. That was a wonderful analysis that you pointed out and brought out into the world.
And for the rest of us, maybe about 20 years before, if we continue to be exposed to chemicals at the rate that we are at, it could be less than 20 years before we cannot produce naturally, which would mean only the elite will be able to produce. We'll find a way to reproduce, I think. Mm-hmm. It just, it won't be naturally. And so that would mean $10,000 to $40,000 a pop to be able to reproduce a child. Mm-hmm. Right, to procreate. And so that means only the elite will be able to procreate. And that creates a very scary world.
It does. It really does. Yes. We can hope that those people who are listening and who work towards maintaining an organic diet will be the ones who can reproduce naturally. And therefore we will naturally grow the population of those people who are being sensible about not exposing themselves to the chemicals. So that's sort of an interesting twist also, to hope that those people who are paying attention and doing something about it are the ones who are going to be able to reproduce.
Yeah,
which is kind of a nice thought.
Listen to Dr. Stephanie Seneff and Gregory Nye and be aware that if you know anyone who is wanting to reproduce, please, to procreate children, please have them go all organic, detox their body, exercise, sweat gets the detoxes, a lot of the toxins very quickly, eat all organic, get out in the sun, as Dr. Stephanie Seneff said, so to get the vitamin D, and to really just take care of yourselves. Drink filtered water that has good minerals in it, have trace minerals. All those minerals that you just mentioned, I don't think enough people know that they need to take trace mineral supplements now. Would you agree about that?
I mean, it's just sad. You shouldn't have to, but actually you can get in trouble because you can get simultaneous toxicity and deficiency at the same time with glyphosate, because it really messes up mineral transport and everything about the minerals gets messed up by glyphosate. It's very scary.
Yeah, so we really have to pay attention to our health. And if you want to find out more, we have it posted on our website, momsacrossamerica.org, under data. I believe it's at the top of the list now for of the data page, glyphosate and anencephaly, death by 1,000 cuts. This is the reason probably why I started Moms Across America, because I wanted my children to be able to have children someday, to be able to experience the profound love that it is to have one's own child if they wish to. They may wish to adopt because they also know that there's a lot of children out there that need to be adopted. But if they wanted to have their own children, I would like them to be able to experience that. And if this continues the way it's continuing now, it's not a guarantee. You know, it could be really actually a miracle if they are able to reproduce, considering the circumstances that we're in this world. So thank you for paying attention. Is there anything else you want to say before we stop the interview?
Just that anybody who's listening, you know, please help to spread the word. Tell your family, get them to eat organic. It's so important. Don't use Roundup in your yard, obviously, you know, and just help to spread the word. That's so important. We need to reach the general population with this message.
Yeah, so my request was everybody who sees this video, please share this study with your OBGYN, right?
There you go.
Share it with your
Yes.
pediatrician. Get this out there. If we have thousands of people sharing this study with their OBGYNs and their pediatricians, this could make a difference for millions of people. So please share, get the word out there. And thank you, Dr. Stephanie Seneff, MIT scientist, for being with us today.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.